Good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday, 3 o'clock. We took a couple weeks off, but we're very, very glad to be back hanging out with you guys this afternoon. Today's guest, again, is somebody that I've wanted to have on for quite a while now. He and I have crossed paths, hung out. We've been friends for a while now. I have a really big respect for what he does, how he approaches what he does, the projects that he started both in Oaxaca and from a Mezcal perspective. And those of you who have traveled to Oaxaca probably know him very well. People absolutely love his restaurant with good reason. Love his mezcales that are coming north of the States. Uncertified agave, whatever you want to call them, and we'll probably get into that in a little bit. But my guest this afternoon is Jason Cox from Destilado and Cinco Sentidos. Jason is joining us from his apartment in Oaxaca, not too far from the Vago office. I just found out today. Jason, how are you doing, bud? There he is. We almost got audio. Waiting for a second. Oh, there we go. Hey, bud. Well, it's good to see you, man. How you doing?
Not bad. Not bad at all. All things considered, very happy and very good. How about you, buddy?
Excellent. Looks like a pretty bright afternoon where you are in Oaxaca.
The sun is shining like it tends to do here.
Yeah, man. Actually, we just got the last 2 days have been cold and rainy here, so it's nice to have a little bit of sunlight out this afternoon. Right about an hour ago, it popped out for the two of us, which is nice.
Right on.
So yeah, man. So you just, I guess, how long ago did you move? I know that you just said you moved not too far from the Vago office, which is in a really beautiful part of Oaxaca City. For those of you guys that don't know, it's in an area called San Felipe, which used to be its own separate town, as many of the neighborhoods used to be at one point, but has now just kind of been encompassed by Oaxaca City. It's really kind of nice, very, family community, really quiet, kind of a hidden place that you would never expect a Mezcal office to be, for sure. But that's where Jason's joining us from. How long have you been up there, man?
Just about 2 months. I actually moved in with my girlfriend and her two dogs. So big steps, big moves.
Wow, man. That's one of the things I miss about living anywhere that's not New York, honestly, is the ability to have dogs. Rachel and I talk about it all the time. We would love to have some pups running around. But thanks again for joining us, man. It really is great to connect with you. I know you and I are WhatsApping pretty much at least once a week. So it's great to actually see your face and interact with you. How are things in Oaxaca? Obviously a very weird time. I know that you are still trying to operate Destilado to a certain extent. Can you fill in some people that are at home and kind of what the situation is down there right now?
I mean, just like every part of the world, Oaxaca is not immune to COVID. So it's certainly had its impact here. It's a bit challenging to understand what the real damage is, because the numbers, are widely understood to be underreported or not reported correctly at all. So, I tend to look at them every day, and there's about 200 new cases reported in the state. And it's been that way for the past few months, but, we know that's probably much, much higher than reality. And, strangely enough, there's still a bit of tourism, which is both good and bad. I mean, it's obviously people coming off of a plane is a really scary idea, because this is, at one point, this was an imported virus, and most of our visitors are from the US, and we know how things are going there. On the other hand, Oaxaca has an economy that's basically built around tourism. So without there being any social support, without there being, literally zero social support, there's no such thing as unemployment insurance here. We need people to come so we can go to work. And the sad thing is that going to work represents a risk, to our health and the health of our families. So I expect it's kind of the same thing in the States too, maybe just not as intense. Probably the one nice thing is that, there really is no need to have, the weather here is perfect all the time, right? So you can generally be outside at all hours and feel comfortable. And, just like everyone in the world, I think, at a certain point, I've certainly had small gatherings where I've seen my friends, whether they be 2 or 3 people, but it's outside on a terrace, and that's something that we can do. Which I know that's a little bit more challenging in other parts of the world right now.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it briefly, and it's something that you and I have really talked about through our WhatsApp communication. A couple weeks ago, my own personal Facebook page or profile, whatever. Out of my own general curiosity, I was really curious to see who has been traveling, how they justify that travel to themselves, and how they reconcile their concerns and their guilt about traveling to other places about that. And you were really one of the first people that I had spoken to internationally. Obviously we both have a very similar circle of bar owners, bar operators throughout the US. But you were the first person that I had really spoken to that was on the ground in a community that is so reliant on tourism. And you brought up that exact point, that it really is very much kind of a double-edged sword, in the fact that it is a risk to people, but at this point that risk has kind of dissolved because it's so prevalent in Oaxaca's own community. And Oaxaca being a place that's so reliant on that tourism economy, that you kind of found yourself in kind of on both sides of that sword. So at this point, do you just kind of feel like there's no point in worrying about people coming in because it is so prevalent, and you're more reliant on that economy to sustain your employees? Or kind of where do you find yourself falling on the ideological spectrum of that?
Oh man, I'm absolutely worried, and it's just the challenging thing about this, and we don't understand 100% still. I mean, we have a much better idea now how it's transmitted than we did even a few months ago, and fortunately, we've kind of gotten rid of the belief that it was like a cooties type thing, where you touch a door handle, I touch a door handle, and so we know what it takes, right, to try to build a safer environment, which is essentially the use of face masks and being in a well-ventilated space or being outdoors. So the idea of that being like, but no, I don't think it's like, oh, come on in, everyone, it's fine. Oaxaca already has it, so you don't represent a risk, because people do. It's a bit more about what you're doing and how you're spending your time. And obviously, I think we know that spending 10 nights at a restaurant, at 10 different restaurants that have outdoor terrace seating represents a much lower risk for you and the people around you than one evening in a packed bar that has behind closed doors with no ventilation system. Unfortunately, I mean, that's the reality. So it's a little bit more about, if you come here, how are you behaving before you came, and how are you behaving while you're here? And unfortunately, there's no checkpoint for that at the airport. So generally, yeah, I mean, a plane full of tourists represents a risk, because it only takes one or two people on that plane to to actually cause serious consequences for what could be dozens, if not hundreds of people. No, man. I mean, I'm not happy about it. But at this point, we've also never really. We don't have a better solution as to how to keep people on a payroll, and a lot of people that we work with are the breadwinners of their families, or the highest salaried. And before this started, we had a staff of 35 people, and we're down to 16 now, and that's largely because we decided not to open our downstairs restaurant. We only service people on our terrace, because it doesn't seem, we got to keep people employed, but we also can't take risks that seem,
Cavalier.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that you guys actually still maintain a staff of that size, honestly, just out of running Techo, and not Destilado.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, between
That's
service, kitchen, and then all the people behind the scenes, cleaning, administration, we're at 16 now, and that's still kind of a big jump from when we reopened, which was only 9 or 10.
So for those at home that don't know, because I think we are lucky in that kind of being part of Samson, Surrey, and being so closely tied to other really awesome brands, is that I think our little, our weekly hour here on Agave Sessions manages to catch a lot of people who aren't necessarily strictly within the Agave space. So for those people who are joining us from kind of outside our little Mezcal world, can you explain what exactly Destilado is, and Cinco Sentidos, and kind of just give us your background? We kind of just jumped right into it and kind of glossed over the intro, which I have a bad habit of doing. I fail to realize that not everybody is as familiar with my guests as I am. So yeah, can you give us a little bit of background on kind of how you got to Mexico, how you opened Destilado, what it is, and how that kind of bore out Cinco Sentidos as well?
Yeah, now that we've done our obligatory 10 minutes of bad news section. So good point. I forget to say who I am sometimes too, but I helped open a restaurant called El Destilado, which is would have turned 5 in July of this year. I mean, I guess it's still turned 5, but we didn't have a party or anything. I came down here to Oaxaca, a few months before that, but essentially met my business partner here, who's a very talented chef, and also, obviously Francisco, which is Joseph Gilbert, and we just opened this space and decided kind of that we wanted to have a mezcaleria / restaurant, and started making some really baller contemporary Mexican food. We didn't have much of a business plan or much of a, and no investors. And to be totally honest, we didn't quite know exactly what we were doing when we started. But we built a pretty solid mezcal program, which involved mostly me sourcing small batches from communities in Oaxaca, Puebla, Michoacan, and Jalisco. And at the same time have an incredible gastronomic experience, arguably one of the best in the city, if not all of southern Mexico. And that's mostly been the work of my partner Joseph. And then a couple of years ago, we opened a rooftop space called El Techo, because we realized that when we were having this awesome culinary experience in the downstairs restaurant, we were also kind of missing the support of our friends and our neighbors. So we opened up a bit more of a casual space, which was a bit more laid back menu, things that people recognize a bit more, kind of a good masa program, so tacos, tlayudas, tostadas, and it's been fun until obviously COVID to manage both of these projects, like a tasting menu, contemporary high-end restaurant experience, and then also a casual, come with your friends for a few chelas and eat while you're here space as well.
And I didn't realize that Techo has already been open for 2 years. That's
closer to 3. Yeah, I think it turns 3. And man, you remember you met Jason Corrales Diaz, right? Bartender from San Diego. He helped us open it, and I think he was here 3 years ago in December. So yeah, we'll say it's 3 years old. I'm pretty sure.
Wow, that's amazing to me that it's already been 3 years.
Man.
Yeah. And it is. I mean, that where you guys are, that location is wonderful, but just the roof space just completely opened it up to a completely different level. I mean, no pun intended. But I always like it because it's just, you guys have always been able to make a very comfortable space there that I think from somebody who up until this year lived a very large part of their life visiting different spaces and restaurants and concepts, etc. You guys, I don't know, you guys always seem to make it very comfortable and yet also unique in comparison to a lot of the other places that are doing the type of food that you guys were doing. Obviously, I think everybody would agree that you guys had one of the better mezcal programs, or at least more curated mezcal programs in the city, for sure. But I don't know, somehow you guys were able to just create such a singular space in the city that I think was really, really incredible. And also, like you said, it could be something where you guys can have something that's a little bit more low key. Like I would always come in like literally off the highway after spending the afternoon out in the hills with Tio Ray or with Acalino and feel completely comfortable sitting at the bar. Or you can go in and have a 50-course, chef's tasting menu at a table. And it was just a really, really wonderful combination of so many different experiences. And I think for me personally, that was one of the things that I always enjoyed. That's why we always brought people through when they were visiting the Vago office and coming down, typically the Fortaleza group and stuff like that. There's just so many different experiences that I think you could have at Destilado that always really made it always different, always fun, and always just really, really a very high standard from both the drink and the food quality as well. So my congratulations to you for making that space. And I know that a lot of us, myself included, cannot wait to get back down there without a doubt.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Not to riff on the restaurant too long, but it's a good point that, I didn't mention that it's not a typical restaurant. It's a colonial mansion. It was a house essentially that we converted into a restaurant, despite using a small domestic kitchen. So that homey feel, that cozy feel, I mean, we were really going for hospitality and feel like you're at home, and with that idea at the same time of being able to eat really incredible food and have highly knowledgeable servers that know everything about our, our wine list, our mezcal list, and have visited the palenqueros, and can show you photos in their phone about a production that they saw, but having none of the stiffness or none of the rigidity or formality that oftentimes high-end dining tends to have, not just in Oaxaca, but in the country overall.
Yeah,
So
and if it, not to be overly critical, but and not it's nothing that's specific to Oaxaca. It's something that I've experienced in several different places. Is that when people try and emulate what would maybe be thought of as, I don't know, a certain style of service that might not be organic, that might not form organically in a particular place, it feels a little bit too forced, like you're trying to emulate a particular style of service that just doesn't fit the culture or the mentality of the particular place that that restaurant seems to exist in. And so I'm really glad that you mentioned that about it being able to have your staff create an experience with their guests that relies heavily on your servers experience, visiting the palenqueros and just, spending time in Oaxaca, being from Oaxaca, etc., that it seems to be a very natural and organic style of service that might not be found other places that are trying to be maybe a little bit too stuffy or too formalized or what have you. So yeah, I mean, obviously Carlos comes to mind, and some of the other people that I've had really awesome experiences with at the restaurant. So I think that not just the physical space, but also the people that are there working and making it happen have just really all come together to make a really awesome energy behind that place. And before we switch topics too much, I did want to ask you a little bit about kind of what it was like to open a restaurant, operate a restaurant as somebody who, I guess maybe now you've been in Oaxaca a while, but when you guys opened Destilado, you guys were still pretty green living in Oaxaca, right? I mean, you guys had not had 5-10 years of experience living and operating in that community, in that world. So what was that like? What were some of the challenges that kind of took you by surprise that maybe you thought might have been different for you guys coming from somewhere else and trying to operate a business? Just what was that like? It seems like a very daunting challenge.
when we started the project, I think I was 27 and Joseph was 25. So I don't think we were yet at the age where we really looked in the mirror and thought about who we are and what we're doing and in the context. Since then, I've had a lot more benefit of time to do that. In part because people ask me that question a lot too. It's like, what's it like being a gringo opening a business? And it was just like, I don't know. It's never opened another business before anywhere. So I only have one experience to compare it to. But I mean, it's kind of predictable. I lived in Latin America before, so I kind of knew to expect that, paperwork takes time, permits take time. Not everyone wants their payment to be above the table, and trying to have to figure out how to navigate that was a little challenging, but kind of par for the course and maybe what I expected. And then, I don't really want to publicly complain that much, but I think it took a long time for us to have a good relationship with the rest of the restaurant industry.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not quite the same. Whereas like in San Francisco or New York, where if you open a bar across the street from my coffee shop, I'm going to go drink at your bar after you open and check it out and see what's up and say hi neighbor, and try to support you. And where unfortunately I think we were seemed a little bit as kind of like a threat or a nuisance or kind of unwanted, which in the grand scheme of things, like in mezcal as well as in gastronomy, was pretty disappointing. It's like we continue to eat and drink at the same establishments here, and we were before we opened, but we don't always have that reciprocity. Reciprocity. So and whatever. I mean, that's fine. I think it took a couple years to realize that you can't please everybody.
Yeah.
But I think with El Techo it was also a more concerted effort to really appeal to our friends and our neighbors, because again, we missed. I mean, we missed the mark when we thought that Oaxacans would be interested in the high-end dining experience, and also put hip hop on our speakers. I mean,
yeah, that's something I remember you and I talked a lot about on the sidewalk whenever I'd be in there, we'd step out for a minute. I remember you mentioning that a lot, even before Techo opened.
It was just a thing where again we talked about the service aspect where we didn't want to be stuffy and rigid because that's not who we are. But we didn't realize that by being casual, by playing the music that we want to listen to, and still overall offering you a really great experience, was just going to miss the mark, because we're playing to play to a local audience, we had to play by a different set of standards that we didn't feel
Yeah.
comfortable necessarily doing because it's not who we are. But now, now it's cool. I really dig it a lot because we're getting more younger people here and part of the art, like the artistic crowd that's local, and part of the mezcal crowd, because we have that space now that's not a daunting tasting menu experience. It's a bit more of come back, relax, and eat what you like. Choose what you eat. That was a big thing. Honestly, I think that was the thing that held us back, is that a lot of people don't like the idea that they're not in control of what they're going to be served. When I think, in the States, generally a place that serves a tasting menu, they only do it because, and you only agree to it because it's going to be great, right? It's like, it's a certain level of food where you're like, I trust you guys to bring me what you want to bring me. We don't have bad things on the menu, I think that's kind of maybe where we missed the mark a little bit, but now we're cool with the techo for sure.
I guess to kind of wrap up this part about talking about Destilado, because we're already, almost 25 minutes in. I really did not plan on talking about Destilado specifically for that much. But when you have people, when I've been there, right, it was a little bit different for me, I feel like, because I would spend a significant amount of time at Destilado, but that was because I was based there at the time. I lived there, but there were people who I knew were passing through, and it happened frequently where I would see them there every single night, essentially, on their visit, which is great for you guys. But did you at any point feel an obligation to encourage those kind of guests to like get out to go buy at La Ayuda, or just see what else is happening in Oaxaca City, and just kind of, it sounds counterintuitive to discourage people from coming to your restaurant, but I know that you opened a restaurant in Oaxaca because you love Oaxaca, and it's a really incredible place. So, how do you also at the same time encourage people to get out and not just focus on Destilado because it's the popular thing, it's the thing that's getting a lot of it. It's the darling of kind of of all the, places to eat and drink in Oaxaca.
No, I mean, because we only opened for dinner, so I expect that they were eating breakfast and lunch somewhere else. And it's also kind of one of those things where when we get that type of regular visit, it's because for whatever reason we've built an environment that makes people feel comfortable to be a regular, and generally that leads to a conversation that's organic, right? About, hey, what should I do tomorrow, or what should I eat, what should I check out, or what should I do that, and that's usually always in the hands of the person taking care of them, whether it's Carlos at the bar or Gloria at a table. But those conversations happen when people want to have them. They feel comfortable, and also, but no, I guess I never really thought about like, man, I got to go tell that guy at the bar that tomorrow night he's got to go eat, at Origen, because I think also it's like we don't do any PR. We've at this point spent $0 on PR in 6 years. So if you have found out about us, it's because you probably researched a trip, or you're part of the industry, or I came on a recommendation list. So, from a friend or from someone who's visited. So, and it wasn't the only thing on the list, I'm sure. You know what I mean? So we always love giving people recommendations, but we don't always necessarily go out of our way if someone's not looking for one.
That makes sense. And I guess that was one thing that obviously I know happens because people ask me all the time. So, of course they're going to ask you guys as well, like, where else should we go, or what else should we see? What else should we do? Which always presents a really great opportunity to kind of tell people whatever is fresh in your mind about what's going on in the city, without a doubt. So, let's transition a little bit. So obviously you guys, Destilado, as most restaurants do, or not most, but a lot of restaurants in Oaxaca have their own kind of house brand of mezcal. And now that has blossomed into a really awesome lowercase m mezcal program or project brand, Agave Spirits brand, whatever you want to call it. So can you tell us a little bit about Cinco Sentidos, kind of, obviously a little bit less about how it came into be its own project, because I think that's kind of clear. But what is your what is your model for how you work with different producers? How do you decide who you're going to work with and things like that? And how many people are you guys working with right now?
Those are all good questions. So I mean, I guess in a short summary, because I think it kind of helps answer your question, is that it was a project that started as our back bar, that things that we sourced. And we looked for them at the time, specifically looking for villages that seemed to be underrepresented or styles that were underrepresented in what was available at Oaxacan mezcalerias. So first it was like, okay, let's look for stuff that's fermented in rawhide, that's distilled in clay pots, that's hand mashed with wooden mallets, because a large percentage of mezcal that you'll find available in Oaxaca or even the larger market tends to be from one or two, sometimes three different villages, if it's from their own mezcaleria. So we wanted to go try to cast as large of a light as we could about how diverse the category was, and that included going outside of Oaxaca to other states that produce mezcal, even though they may not at the time have been famous or even known to produce mezcal by general audience. And through the course of those, what first started as sourcing trips for the restaurant turned into relationships and getting to know people and understanding how they work and understanding who they are as human beings, and vice versa. And eventually each one has a different path about how they came to market with a family, basically come to a point where we've committed to purchasing someone's entire production or as much as they're willing to allow us to purchase. But that's always been based on a couple, first and foremost, the reason that you go back to a palenque the second time is because you like the way the mezcal tasted. So quality is undoubtedly a huge factor. But then just kind of like the person, who they are, what their commitment is to sustainability in most cases in terms of planting and preparing and being stewards of the land that they have or that they're on, and then trusting in them, and it goes both ways, right? Because it's at this point, it feels like as brand owners, it's almost like, I want to be careful with my language, but I feel like sometimes brand owners feel like they need to protect their relationships, which is kind of funny, but it's an indication that there's so much demand for mezcal that producers these days have the opportunity to sell it to whoever they want. Yeah. So building a relationship in which I was a person that they wanted, they want me to bottle their mezcal and put it in our restaurant. They want me to be the face of their work in across a border. And likewise, it's just something, it's really hard to get excited about selling something that you like the way it tastes, but you think the guy who makes it's kind of a jerk, and there have been examples.
Which happens, right? I mean, these guys are human beings. That's one of the things I think people forget about.
Oh yeah, and I mean, it's not. I mean, we've had 2 or 3 different producers where we worked with that we were just sourcing small batches for the restaurant from, and after a few months, kind of decided to put the brakes on it, even though it was like, wow, this tastes great, and people really love this particular expression, but this guy's a real dick to his wife. Yeah, I mean, serious. It's just one of these things where it's like it's the same way that you might feel uncomfortable seeing a family member mistreat another family member. It's the same thing is true with someone who eventually. I mean, then you've had a chance to come visit me, Alberto in Alvaradas just once, and that was about 3.5 or 4 years ago. But I mean, Alberto's essentially an uncle to me now. It's like when we're talking on the phone, we're talking on the phone with each other about how things are going in our lives, not about mezcal necessarily. And that's the case with the long-term, the guys we've worked with in a long time. Amando's a buddy who I like to go out in the town with when he's in Oaxaca City. It's like he's a drinking buddy. I mean, he's also someone that we work with, but he feels like a friend from college or something like that at the same time. So I don't know. I guess I'm a sensitive guy because that type of stuff is really important to me. Like knowing that, trusting the people I work with, letting them trust me, and really believing in who they are as people too.
Yeah, I guess touching on that, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on how a brand at this point differentiates themselves. What do you think are the things that are important? Because you mentioned sustainability, but now that is such a part of every brand's marketing strategy for the most part, which it should be, and it should be something that's very important. That's something that's always been very important to us at Vago. That's something we've always talked a lot about. But now it is kind of the commonplace to a certain extent for brands, right? So
I'll interject there. I don't even think that's true, Cisco. To be honest, I think it's true that it's part of their marketing program.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's true and part of like what's actually happening in the ground.
No.
And one
Yeah.
of the things that's been
absolutely. I would agree with you 100% on that. But I mean, really, ultimately, at the consumer level, that's kind of hard to differentiate, right? So how would you go about separating that wheat from the chaff, so to speak, right? Whether it's from a sustainability perspective, a relationship perspective, because hearing you talk about the relationships that you have with producers, I think that is one of the things that sets certain brands apart to a certain extent. And I'm just really curious about how you see Cinco Sentidos differentiating itself, how you kind of see what you seem to be as the separator between brands that are, that meet a certain standard and brands that don't, from a variety of perspectives.
I'm not so sure that I can answer your question very well, if I even totally understand it. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, like, you've known me long enough to know that I've got like virtually zero filter, which is, and sometimes a bad thing and sometimes a good thing. I've learned how to polish my words a bit better in the past few years. But so I mean, I'm kind of, sometimes I'm reluctant to publicly talk about the state of the mezcal world in general. Yeah. But I think about our own project, which sounds I don't want to sound like I'm pandering or anything like that, but we don't really think about marketing. At the end of the day, it's like what we do is just like the person that I am. It tends to be a very blunt, forward, honest, I don't know, very, very straightforward person, I guess. And that's just what we do. It's what we put out there. It's just like, these are photos of people producing and then the way they produce. And this is the stories that people have told with me. And here's the facts and knowledge that I know and share with you. And I think maybe when we came to the market, which was just a few years ago, at that time, it may have favored us that like I really, really study what our craft that people are working on, and I really try to teach and transmit and express about exactly what's happening and what's happening in the still and what's happening in the fermentation, and why does this agave different than the other agave, and an infinite amount of factors that go into this production process, and just tell us stories the way they've been told, that they've been shared with me, and nothing more, nothing less. So I mean, sometimes it's a bummer when you see like brands that are marketing first, but that's also kind of the way that the spirits industry works. Like 95% of brands are that, essentially that, because nearly every other distilled spirit is essentially more or less the same thing in a different package. Which I don't mean to piss off everyone in the the world of gin or vodka or whatever, but it's just the way that that's the MO, of the industry by and large. When we think about volume and amount of cases sold, it's like, it's all the same stuff. And it's just sold to you based on an image. And mezcal is very different in that sense, but it's becoming that way a little bit. Sometimes you see these lifestyle brand mezcals and it's just disappointing, because it's like, man, don't commodify this. This isn't about, this spirit isn't about feeling like a baller at a club, or feeling whatever. I really don't know how marketing works, I guess, but an identity thing, I guess, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, but I think to a certain extent, I think we all knew that was inevitable. Anybody who didn't think that was going to happen to the agave spirits industry, I think, was naive to a certain extent, right? Because if it was not good, if mezcal wasn't good, I think a lot of us would have a certain love for it just from a cultural perspective, right? But on top of that, it also tends to be one of, if not the most expressive distilled spirit in the world.
I have a question for you, if I can. Can we have a conversation? Can I ask you a question?
Sure, man.
So you just said something about this, and I think this is interesting, because you said, by and large, mezcal is good. How do you feel, man? I mean, I don't know how much you get to taste other stuff by other brands or emerging brands, or, what percentage of the stuff in the U.S. market excites you?
It's hard to say because, I mean, what percentage of the stuff in the U.S. market excites me? It's difficult to say. I mean, I could easily tell you that there are a handful of brands that I I revere, right? And it's a very small group of brands. But even that being said, out of those particular brands, there might be certain expressions or certain batches that are not necessarily my favorite. And I think you and I have actually talked about this, and this was one of the questions I had for you also was, how you pick certain batches that you're going to release, because that question was rooted in some of the discussions that you and I have had, wherein you guys might have a batch that maybe wasn't my particular favorite, or some of your and my discussions about some of the specific batches from Vago that we both knew on both sides, on the Sentidos side and the Vago side, were really well constructed, really incredibly crafted distillates. But for whatever reason, that particular batch just may not have been our particular favorite, or just not in our wheelhouse, right? For me, it tends to be stuff that comes from the Karwinski family, for example. Like, I've been pretty outwardly outspoken about the fact that I tend not to like 100% pure Quiche expressions and stuff like that. So, overall, I think there is a lot of really great, incredible quality mezcal on the market. I will also unabashedly say that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to pick that mezcal to drink, because there's a lot of really incredibly crafted mezcals that don't necessarily appeal to my palate and my flavor perspective and my preferences. I tend to like things that have a little bit more richness to them, that are a little bit sweeter. A lot of people, again, to use the Quiche example, absolutely love Quiches from different producers and from all over the place. That starchiness, that grassiness, that dryness, I love it because it reminds me of a desert environment where I'm from, but that's not necessarily the flavor profile that I really love. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of producers, there's a lot of brands that I have the absolute utmost respect for, but I might not love every single release that they particularly do. Del Maguey comes to mind because San Pedro Ceviche is an expression that I absolutely love and is one of my absolute favorites. But then there are some other ones that Del Maguey has put out that I typically tend not to order, that maybe a lot of bartenders and things like that absolutely revere. And that's just a difference in preference.
15%. Ladies and gentlemen, Francisco Terraza said he only likes 15% of the mezcal available.
All mezcal.
All mezcal in the world. I'm kidding. It's funny to try to assign a number to such a nebulous, because it is a category that it's not nebulous, it's just so wide and large. And I understand that not being able to pick, it's hard for me to say, but because I feel the same way 100%. I mean, I was tasting a couple days ago a special edition batch from a brand that I really like, not yours, not Vago, but from a different brand that I always respect. And I was like, man, this is just not, I know these guys work right, and I know that it's a quality product. I know that they wouldn't put their name on something that they didn't think was great, but this is just not doing it for me. And I think that might be one of these things where, with you and I having consistent and constant access, it's really challenging to figure out things that I like and why I like certain things, because my palate, certainly, like everyone, has evolved over time. And now I'm looking for things that are funky and creamy and kind of like raicilla type stuff, or is what really gets me excited, especially if I'm going to spend money on mezcal that's not from my own collection, which is at this point quite extensive. I kind of look for things that are atypical to what I know. And I think maybe it's in a weird place to be as a mezcal aficionado, because the rest of the market is probably still just figuring out what a Quiche is.
Yeah. And that's also one of the things where that kind of transitions into one of the other topics I wanted to touch on a little bit, and this is kind of one of the stickier ones, is kind of the tone that is set in social media around mezcal, because I feel like it's very odd, because I feel like, if you say that you don't particularly like a particular mezcal, all of a sudden it's that you don't like that brand, or you don't like that producer's mezcal, right? And yet at the same time, at the drop of a hat, I see people who are just getting into mezcal and are on the boards and asking, what do you guys think of this one? Should I buy this or whatnot? And there's a very immediate and quick reaction from people to ridicule or, to laugh at people or be angry about a particular brand. And, I just feel like maybe it's just a lack of experience of working with consumers who are very, very new to mezcal, because I think that does teach you to have a certain amount of patience and have a certain amount of perspective that most people are absolutely new to this. They don't spend a lot of time interacting with other enthusiasts about mezcal. So, me personally, I always try and be a little bit more just receptive to people and explain to them, like, without mentioning a particular brand. Usually I'll be like, look, you can like whatever brand you want, but these are the particular things that you should be looking for. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? About kind of how to quote unquote market a brand. It's like, you can't really necessarily judge those things. And that's one of the reasons I talk a lot about it being a series of relationships based on trust, from the level of the brand or the producer to the brand, to the importer, to the distributor, to the bar, to the consumer, because the consumer is so far removed from the point of production. And there's so many steps in between that it really just relies on trusting each point in that relationship to make the right decisions about what they're ultimately bringing to the producer, right? So I feel like sometimes all I can do is tell consumers, like, these are the things that you should be looking for from a brand or from a producer, and trust your bartender or trust your retailer to bring you things or show you things that are going to meet those certain standards. And then outside of that, it doesn't really, feel free to like whatever you want. But just, these are some of the things that these are certain standards that need to be met for the longevity, for the long-term sustainability of the category. And then outside of that, you can pick or choose, whether it's an Alipus or a Vago or a Cinco Sentidos or a Del Maguey, whatever, but you're probably not going to like every single one. And people who ask about a brand that maybe might not meet some of those standards, that particular person shouldn't be ostracized, but just be like, okay, that's cool, but this is what we usually tend to look for. And I just wish there was a little bit more of that kind of understanding from a very new perspective.
Is there something
I guess, sorry, I got myself on a little bit of a rant there, but, it goes back to kind of identifying what you think, how much good mezcal there is out there. And it's a very difficult path to navigate,
Well, there's two things, right? I mean, one, I don't want to play the devil's advocate here for being like the dude who's a dick on Facebook forums, but one, it's social media, and people take it social media. Some people take it much more serious than others.
Yeah.
And two, so it's one of these things that I never. It's not that I don't take it serious, but rather it's just kind of like it's very challenging to the loudest arguments on social media are still falling on deaf ears to me sometimes. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, like I can't get riled up about someone saying this, that, or the other, because it's some guy bored behind his desk at on his whatever. Like, it's just something that. So I don't know. I mean, I don't disagree with you, because I don't think it's cool or fun to be ridiculing somebody about anything, especially when it's like, hey, what do I think about this? But I mean, I think about, like, the same response would happen if you were on a Facebook group that was dedicated to French cheeses and someone put up a photo of Kraft cheddar.
Oh yeah.
Just like people would say, hey, dude, like, you've gone wrong, man. Kraft sucks. It's the they've got a it's big business, it's big industry. They've got a diffuser facility. Yeah, like, why are you messing with big cheese, dude? Like, we like artisanal stuff here, like, get that Kraft out of here. So I mean, that would happen across any sort of enthusiast spectrum, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately, most recently, the tone is a little bit more negative, and I can't really quite attribute to that, apart from the fact that sometimes those are brand owners themselves that are part of that conversation. And it's like, I see stuff online and I'm like, in a public forum, I'm never going to diss anyone or say, hey man, like, that brand does this, or you should try something a bit better. it's just something that like doesn't seem appropriate to do as a brand owner. But the thoughts cross my mind. Sometimes it's like, oh wow, like you're excited about that, like a 30% ABV stuff that's like mass blended and has no character, and and has no sustainability efforts and no transparency. Like I see that stuff, and it doesn't. I'm not thrilled that that's what someone's first introduction to mezcal is, and I don't mean that from a jealousy standpoint. It's not like, oh, you should be drinking Cinco Sentidos. I mean, like, you should be drinking Alipus or Vago, or I mean, one of a dozen or 2 dozen brands that have all of this stuff together. And I think this. The first time I was ever exposed to mezcal was Mezcal Vago. And quite frankly, had it not been through, going to a tasting that was manned by Judah and tasting really great distillates and hearing a cool story, maybe I would have been turned off if it was something that was low ABV and just try to sell a story of mysticism in their marketing about like this was harvested from the teat of Mayawel, the goddess of Agave, and not tell you anything about at all about the actual product, but just try to sell you a fairy tale. I wouldn't be here. So I mean, so I do see that stuff sometimes, and I think, and I get a little just disappointed. Like, oh man, wish that guy tried something better. You know?
That's how I feel a lot too. But then also, but at that particular moment, you can I feel like you can either laugh at that person for recommending that particular one, or you can say, okay, cool, but just a heads up, if you ask about that bottle here, like this is kind of the response you're going to get, and this is why. And in my personal experience, I've found that people once they get defensive, I feel like they stick even harder to what they think they know. But in my experience, talking to people, whether it be at a trade show or at a Vago taste, at an office tasting or wherever, if you're more receptive to kind of their naivety and what it is that in their newness to the category, and then explain to them why you might not have made that same decision, they automatically, for some reason, start to be more receptive to what it is that you're saying in the first place. And I've always found much better results from people when I say, okay, cool, that brand, without figuring out a finessed way of getting out of recommending whatever it might be in front of you, and then kind of just shifting, kind of guiding where they should put their priorities and their purchasing decisions, always seems to bear better fruit, I feel like. But you did mention like the mysticism and stuff like that. And that was one of the questions I had for you, is kind of, what are some of the things that you feel like are maybe over marketed to a certain extent in mezcal, right? Because specifically one of the examples I mentioned when I emailed you was talking about like kind of the mysticism behind it. And a lot of the producers that I've interacted with, they don't carry that same mentality. They don't carry that same lens and view mezcal through that same lens. To the extent that it might be kind of quote unquote marketed as, you know what I mean? So I'm kind of curious on what are some of the things that you think might be a little bit misleading to how mezcal is marketed to people?
Well, I mean, I think that I'll have to disagree with you to a certain extent too, that not everyone, it takes some time for people, I think, mezcal producers to maybe open up and talk about what mezcal might mean to them from a spiritual standpoint or from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah.
And I haven't had that conversation with people until knowing them, knowing them very well for many years. I think it's just something that's for whatever reason, sometimes it doesn't feel, people feel comfortable expressing that, especially to an outsider, until you're able to approach that topic. So, understanding a little bit more about certain regions and people harvesting under a full moon cycle versus a new moon, and having beliefs about the way that the earth interacts with the plant and how sacred and important these plants are, is a real thing, but it's probably not the conversation that someone's having with a fly-by-night brand owner who flies in twice a year from somewhere else and has to hire an interpreter to translate, and they're buying it. It's just the brands that tend to be kind of guilty of what I think a little bit of that tactic are the ones that seem to have the least amount of connection to the land and the people that make it, and it's a compensation tactic is what I think a little bit. It's like, well, I really can't tell you the story about who makes this or how they make it, or So I'll tell you something else. That I Wikipedia the Popol Vuh and picked out a Mayan legend to highlight, and that's what we're going to go with. It is kind of funny to see other pre-Hispanic, not funny. I mean, I guess I laugh, but it's just like more of laughing from absurdity when people are like citing, pre-Hispanic cultures that, or pueblos originarios that don't have any relation to mezcal producing today or even in the past, and including them in their marketing. And it's like, and even more so when that business is almost always owned by someone who is not from that town, right? That town, that village, or maybe even this country. And you go, okay, like, I mean, that is cultural appropriation essentially, and it's an example of, it's like we're gonna sign a Mayan legend to something made by a Zapotec person. It's like, what the fuck? That's I don't know if I can say the F word on here. Sorry, but that's the only way I know how to respond to that, because it's absurd. I mean, it's absurd. And it's equally offensive as the F word. It's like assigning this other thing because it's Mexico and it's all the same. It's according to somebody's vision or what they think works appropriately for marketing. And it's it's just a little absurd, man. And the flip side too, it's just like, what I was telling you about certain producers' relationship with agave in the land, which I find to be really beautiful and respect, aren't necessarily aspects of that I think should be marketed or marketable.
That's a good point.
And we've got a strange thing right now where in the world of agave spirits, most brands that are quality try to do their best at being as transparent as possible. But I think you cross a line a little bit with certain anecdotes that you tell, if that person is not aware that everything that you share to them is going to be broadcast to the public someday.
Yeah.
So that's something that I try to be careful too. I mean, unfortunately, there's no book written about this, right? About what are the ethics of marketing in agave spirits. So I think we all have to make judgment calls based on that align with our own values. And I think constantly those are evolving, and I'm analyzing them myself as well. But it is, by and large, it's disappointing to see mysticism and on the label, or probiotic, or not probiotic, but gluten-free and low calorie, and no, like, this doesn't give you a hangover. It's pure. It's like the purest of the gods, the Mayan gods. And it's just like, that language drives you nuts. But maybe what drives you even more nuts is that it seems to work sometimes. And it's like, damn, man, like, maybe consumers, maybe I'm not mad at the brand owner, right? Maybe the person to be disappointed with is the final consumer. Who, you know what I mean? Because I mean, I guess the brands wouldn't do it if it didn't have some sort of success.
Yeah, I mean, I do, but I also feel like that particular style of telling a story behind a product is not 100% the most accurate, right? And that's my perspective. It's like, yeah, absolutely. There's some producers that think about it that way or talk about it that particular way, but not all producers. And I think when some people talk about mezcal, and I don't know, it's weird. That's the other thing too, though, is that these people are human beings. Going back to what we talked about earlier. Some people, some of the producers that you worked with and decided not to, they have faults, right? One producer is going to be different outside of having faults as human beings, but we each have our own identity. We have our own autonomy as human beings, right? So every single person is going to be different. And I think that kind of gets forgotten about a little bit in the way that people talk about mezcal, is that some of the people, or some of the ways that people talk about it, those aspects of agave spirits get applied to all agave spirits writ large. And maybe, one producer might not, various producers might not think about things in the same way as other people. And I think that sometimes consumers kind of forget that to a certain extent, and it's weird, because we're walking a very fine line, because you also just kind of lamented that, the not lamented, but you mentioned kind of the exposure of people to a certain extent, and that's always been something that I have a little bit of an issue with, and that's just kind of the age of social media, is the immediate access that it kind of gives producers or consumers to producers, right? Where sometimes I think it's almost better if there's a little bit of a barrier between that, because we as brands always try and be transparent with our consumers 100%. But then also, I think just kind of a society at large, we also, because we're given that transparency as consumers, I think to a certain extent, we just kind of expect a certain level of access to the producers. And it's one of the things that I know I've seen talked about a little bit on social media and stuff, of like posting people's houses and stuff like that, you know, and or towns that they live in. But most of the people, I do have to say overall, that are producing really quality agave spirits and are some of the brand owners that you and I respect and admire, are always, even if they don't get it perfectly every single time, I feel like they navigate the world earnestly and are trying to do their best to provide access to producers, provide transparency, but also to a certain extent protect the producers for their, not necessarily for their own good, but just at least to give them their own autonomy as people, right? Not automatically expose them as something, as people to just kind of be, for example, dropped in on out of nowhere, you know? And I think that kind of ties into how we market these agave spirits is through transparency, but also that transparency, I think, leads to a certain expectation of access that may or may not be the best thing. I think is one of the things that I kind of, one of the things that I find fault in how we market agave spirits. Does that make sense? I don't even know if it does.
It does.
I mean, but I don't know. I you know, looking at you and how you work with specific producers and kind of how you tell their stories and how Vago tells their stories and how some of our friends tell these stories, you know, it's an ever evolving, like you said, nobody's written a book on how to do this, right? We're all just kind of figuring it out as we go.
Yeah, I think it's a very, exactly. We're all just kind of playing by the rules that we ourselves are making up, but I think some people are a bit more conscientious about what rules they play by than others at the end of the day. I don't know what else I can add to that from what you said, but I agree.
Yeah. Well, we're already down to like 2 minutes, man. I guess we didn't even get to talk about certification. We didn't talk about rum at all. Some of the things that we wanted to talk about, but you and I always end up having conversations like this. So I guess it should be no exception at all. Thank you so much for taking some time out, man. It's really great to connect with you. I really just, again, cannot express my thanks. I'm glad we finally got this nailed down. I know it took us a couple of weeks, but here we are. And I really, really, really thank you for your time, man, and your thoughts.
Of course, always a chance. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. I'm happy to, you know, we'll keep the dialogue going between ourselves anyways. And, you know, send my saludos to Rachel as well.
Absolutely, man. We did see a couple of Facebook questions that I didn't get to. Eric, I see your question here. I will ask that offline of Jason, and I will get you an answer, and we will post it in in the comments underneath this chat afterwards. So thank you very much for asking that. Everybody else, we'll see you all next Thursday, 3 o'clock Eastern. Jason, thanks again, man. Please take care of yourself. Say hello to Joseph for me, and we'll see you whenever we can see you, my friend.
Sounds good. Cheers. Be well.